Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Alumni Webinar series initiated for the Alumni Committee. So, today, on the eve of International Day of Education and National Girl Child Day, which is observed every year in India on January 24th, it's to promote awareness about the rights of a girl child and to promote the importance of their education, health, and nutrition. The topic that we'll be discussing today is gender education and empowerment. The panelists for today's discussion are Ragini, Nupur, and Aditya with Manoj. So over to the panelists and Manoj.
Thank you, Neha, and a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined this webinar. Many of you registered, and you spared time to kind of join this discussion. Several of you have sent some questions, interesting questions. Probably some of the questions we will like to engage with. As Neha said, today is National Girl Child Day. So we are focusing on gender education and empowerment. And we are trying to bring perspective from the grassroots organizations. And in this webinar, we are featuring three speakers, and I'm saying this with a sense of pride that three of them have graduated from Azim Premji University. And now they are contributing in the field of education. They are doing wonderful work in their respective fields. And somewhere their work is related to this question of gender and education. And of course, they are working in the framework of justice and empowerment. So we'll try to understand from them. We'll start with, understanding their work, the organization they have been working with, uh, their current assignments, how they see the issues from the place where they have been working. So all these questions we'll be addressing in webinar today. So maybe I'll start with Ragini today, and probably we'll try to understand. Ragini, if you may speak a bit about the organization you have been working with, some of your works, your current assignment, and things like that, and then we'll take it up from there. Ragini, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Um, and thank you for organizing this and for agreeing to moderate this. It's always nice to meet one's teacher in a webinar platform like this. Um, I finished my MA education from Azim Premji University in 2019. Prior to that, for 2 years, I was working in a government school in Delhi. Uh, Post my MA, I was exploring the idea of what it means to create relevant and critical educational um, initiatives for marginalized groups, and that landed me working in an organization in Bhopal named Muskan. Um, Muskan's work is largely to do with the urban poor. The groups that Muskan engages with are displaced Adivasi groups, Gond communities living in the bastis of Bhopal, and also denotified tribes, Vimukta Jatis. The particular history of the Vimukta Jatis is one of being stigmatized as branded criminals. It dates back to a colonial law, Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. And even after being denotified in 1952, the community still faces a lot of stigma in all avenues of life, right from housing to access to water to education to jobs. So it is within that context that the organization is trying to figure out what kind of a critical, relevant, and meaningful education would empower our students, would empower the young people that we work with. Uh, at a two pronged level. One is to understand one's own history and see what structures of power are operating upon us. They are not incidental or fated, but they have a history of oppression. One is at that level, and the other is also to understand that within this reality, what does it mean for us to be able to dream, or what does it mean for us to be able to critically hope for something new? How do we imagine ourselves in sustaining democratic institutions when our everyday reality is full of so many challenges of being pushed out of various spaces, be it at the hands of the state, be it at the hands of the police, be it at the hands of a government school teacher. So it is in this context that Muskan works. My work currently in Muskan is as a teacher researcher. I'm trying to figure out with a group of young adults who are all going to give class 12 exams this year, what does critical pedagogy in action look like for young people who have had very intermittent and sporadic relationships to schooling, who have had periods of their life where they have been pushed out of school, who are also working and coming to school. The work that the young people that I work with do are segregating waste or waitering during the shadi season, carrying battis during the barat, um, or other small work like selling water in the market areas, etc. So, critical pedagogy in that context, what does that look like? While being rooted in compassion and hope. Where talking about social justice does not make us feel like this is never going to change, or our ways of thinking are always going to be this way. So how can we feel resourced while also talking about social justice? And that is the area that I'm trying to explore with this group. And this research work that I'm doing is part of an interest group housed in Azim Premji University called the Interest Group for Dialogue, Fraternity, and Justice. So that's a little bit about my work right now.
Thank you, Ragini. I think it's many things to understand, right? Particularly the way you put it. How to be hopeful in a circumstances which is circumstances where one may feel stuck, right, or hopeless. So, what kind of pedagogy can be sort of devised from a teacher and educator like you, which can bring certain hope and certain compassion, right? Where apparently it looks like on the surface of it, the situation doesn't allow for any compassion and care, particularly for the community you work with. So I'll come back to you, but right now maybe Aditya can also tell something about the work he has been doing. So probably from there we can start.
Yeah. Hi, Manoj.
Yeah,
So I have graduated from Azim Premji University in 2014, and it's really privileged to come back again and like say start with this. So I've been working with Labbe Foundation currently, and the organization or like our work is basically related to the uh, what we say, and we are working on the educational concept that is like something which is way beyond the regular subjects like maths or reading or other core subjects. We are working on social emotional learning part. So when we say social emotional learning part, which basically it is beneficial, what we have learned is it is beneficial to both, whether it's a child or an adult basically. So it helps in like increasing your self awareness, your academic achievements, and more to positive behaviors both in and out of the classroom. And also we believe that SEL helps kids identify their feelings, understand and communicate with others, and also build a strong relationship and make good decisions. So that is like the curriculum on which we are working with is somehow building all these things with the in a kid. Uh, I have I have engaged with different state governments, and I've worked closely on the issues related pertaining to the girl child. I've worked with Foundation to Educate Girls, which is basically working on the out of school girls. So we have I've worked like I've seen the issues which are really deep rooted in the state of Rajasthan, state of UP and Bihar and Madhya Pradesh, and then moved to move to Delhi, working with the Delhi government on the happiness curriculum. So that's
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Aditya. So I could clearly see that the three things. One is you all have identified this issue of dropout, or as Ragini put it rightly, it's pushed out from the school system, right? So this idea of and many issues with girl child is well recognized, but well recognized much more as an outcome. So there is a gender ratio issue, there is issue about labor participation rate, female labor participation rate. There are issues around dropouts, right, and huge gap in literacy rate between male and female. So all these are outcomes, but behind these outcomes there are certain processes, underlying processes, not always visible. So probably two parts of your work, it looks like. One is to identify some of those processes which is probably giving us these results in terms of learning outcome or being pushed out and things like that. And then third aspect of your work is to kind of also respond to this situation. So Aditya, probably you are responding it through, socio-emotional kind of learning, and you feel that that will help somewhere to, retain these student in the system where they can get certain education and also feel empowered, right? Also contribute to the general pool of knowledge and things like that. So these three part I can clearly see in your work and the way you are putting it so nicely. I'll just invite now Nupur. Nupur is also working in a circumstances which is which is very different, and probably she's also identifying certain issues in a particular context. So her work as a researcher, probably that work has provided her opportunity to work with certain community organizations, and from there she's identifying certain processes of gendering and the issues pertaining to education. So Nupur, if you can go ahead and describe your work a bit, probably from there we can take it up.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much. I'm glad to be part of this webinar where I'm sharing screen with Ragini, Aditya, and Manu sir. Sir mentioned that I finished my MA education in 2021. Soon after, I joined as research associate with Professor Aman Madan, School of Education. So my current engagement is to my research subject is to understand how adolescents deal with the conflicts. This research work is based in two districts, in six villages of two districts, Godda and Tumka of Santhal Pargana, Jharkhand. And I am largely engaged with the OBC communities and Santhal communities. So, as part of the research, when we have to design tools and when we have to develop contextual scenarios and case studies as tools, we decided to conduct some sessions with adolescents to understand their their aspirations and how do they deal with conflicts in their lives and how do they respond to when some conflicts happen. So during those conversations, I got much understanding about how adolescents are, what kind of conflicts they are having in their general life, and how these conflicts are both interpersonal and also structural in many ways. This also, and then when we were conducting interviews, also there were a lot of there were a lot of narratives that were talking about how their gender intersects with with the kind of community they are part of, their economic status. Um, and the education. So, for example, most of the girls, they were, in fact, most of the narratives from boys and girls, both they were largely talking about domestic violence. So, Godda in Jharkhand has the highest number of child marriage rate, and almost all the narratives had mentioned about domestic violence and how these adolescents are concerned about it. We had girls who were saying that we want to study because so that if I earn something or if I have my job, my husband might not beat me. So these kind of narratives uh, gave me some understanding of kind of aspirations that these girls have, and it kind of social situations in which these aspirations are embedded. So like Arjun Appadurai says that aspirations are not individual phenomena; these are very these are these are formed in
That's true.
social interaction and embedded in the social life, and this can one can see this clearly in the community. So I think for today's webinar, I will be talking more of my interaction from my interaction with these adolescents about their aspirations and how what gender and education and especially schooling. So there is no alternative schooling there. There are just formal government schools that are operating there, especially within the village. And how does this play their role in their aspirations, and how aspirations change according to which community they come from and what kind of social background and economic status that they have.
Okay, so wonderful. I think now probably we can talk about this very processes which is sort of creating gender and through which gender identities are being formed both in within the community and in the school. So all three of you have experience of either working in community or in a school, and in some cases you have been working in community as well as in school. So as I said, that we know the outcome of gender discrimination, and disparity is very stark, nobody can ignore that. But there are processes which is creating such situations for girls. So in the next round, in this round, probably we can talk about some of the processes which you have identified in your work context. That these are some of the processes which basically generating or giving this kind of result. For example, Nupur just mentioned this idea of child marriages. So this is very institutionalized form of this is institutional practice within a community, and these are the practices which is resulting into sort of gender disparity in educational outcome, or huge gap between male and female literacy rate and other such issues, right? So likewise, if again Aditya, you can start by identifying some of the issues which you, if you have worked within the community, if you can identify certain issues in community. But what I understood from your previous conversation, that your work concerns much more work within the school. So whether you identify something within the school itself which is creating certain kind of gender identity, and probably it can be done somehow somewhat differently, so that a girl child and people with different forms of gender can feel little empowered, right, and see some hope in education, right? uh, Aditya, you can start.
Yeah, Manoj. While if I say school plays an important role in bringing the gender lens in, so what I foresee, what I have seen after the certain period of time, a change in the school transform. I can say a transformation in the school basically, or a transformation in teachers basically. Teachers play a key role. So when we say gender needs to be the at the core of each and everything, I think teacher is somewhere who has a main who has to play main role into it, because at times we have seen earlier, like teacher used to be very clear about, say, when we praise few of the children, teacher praises, we have listened that there are teachers who praises generally boys. They have been generally they point out for few things, like say for sports and etc, that these are the sports which are only for boys, and these are for girls. So what we have seen in changes in the school is like, if teachers are trained well, if the activities which are gender centric, it's not only for girls or not for boys, it should be like for both of it. So I think these are the few initiatives which has at least mitigated this gender um, issues to a level. It has not been totally over, but it has, at least they are now aware of it, that yeah, this is something which needs to be taken care of, this is how something which we can be go ahead. So that is how I have seen in his school, and even if we say out of school as well. So engagement with the parents, again, when we say engagement of the parent is required, I think that is where again the teacher plays an important role of about creating the awareness, letting the parents know about the importance of, generally we say importance of education, but I would say importance of girls education, because if a girl is, like say, educated, it can be like say it can be a wonders for the whole community and the whole family. So that is what needs to be paced in. Generally we have seen the education is important, but now the lens needs to be changed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one supplementary question for you, Aditya, because one of the participants have asked this question. That suppose there are situations where the number of girls in the school is reasonably high, but the all the teachers are male. So how can a male teacher can address very personal issues, so-called personal issues of these female students? So if you have any experience around that, if you can just throw some light on that, because
uh,
you brought the teacher in the picture,
yeah.
that teachers play a very critical role in this process. Our teachers can help in reproducing the gender stereotypes, which already prevails outside in the community. And teacher can also empower a student and let them see things differently and critically, right? So if you have any such example, any such experience with teacher, where you felt that no teacher have played an important role, probably that will be useful.
I think we need to change lens from gender being gender sensitive to gender sensitization. So when
All
we
right.
we have heard we have always heard about that we need to be gender sensitive and etc. But I think sensitization is something which is really required. So that is where if the number of teachers, male teacher is high and the number of girls are high in the school, but if they are sensitized towards the issues of the girls, definitely that will minimize the situations, minimize the scenarios. So that is what I have seen at least one of these while I was working with one of the state, like in school. So I've seen that if the numbers are high, but if they are like if they are okay with if they're sensitized with the issues, with the concerns, with the challenges, then the things and the lens changes.
Right, right. So, Ragini, you mentioned this critical pedagogy several times, and there are many sociologists, particularly critical pedagogue, they bring this point quite starkly that school can also reproduce the existing inequalities. But school can be a space where certain transformations may also happen. So school has both the potential, right? And as you know, that one of the critical pedagogue or critical theorists, Henry Giroux, has used this phrase for teacher as a transformative intellectual, right? So in your context, two things. One is what are some of the processes which you have recognized in the community, because you are working very closely with the community and you are working there for a while now. And the second is there any hope within the school? Or is there something which you have done within the school which is bringing certain kind of hope? Because you mentioned several times this idea of critical pedagogy and doing critical pedagogy in a real context, right? Practicing it in a certain context. And then having this sense of that, yes, it has, given certain hope in a circumstances where you work. Yes.
Yeah. Um, so, in the particular context where my very limited work over the past 1 or 2 years with the group has been, um, I think talking about gender as an isolated category um is a bit difficult in that the history of how different tribal communities have been displaced from their land, uh, have moved from different parts of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh into cities, and the space that they occupy within city planning when cities are converting into smart cities is also contributes to the processes that then become the lived experience or the doing of gender and the doing of caste. That for displaced Adivasi groups where who Muskan engages with, and particularly within the Vimukta Jatis, uh, the historically the Pardhi community, Kanjar, Bedia, Sasi, Kuchpandia, these are the communities that Muskan works with, um, have had a history of being hunting gathering communities. Uh, in the colonial law, the Criminal Tribes Act, and when forests were being nationalized, this loss of open space, this loss of livelihood, and this loss of identity and then being trapped in certain outskirts of the cities um, has led in some ways, and of course I'm speaking as an outsider to the community here, for women and young girls to occupy a position of double marginality, where the patriarchal hold on what it is that a young girl does becomes doubly repressive. So you're at the hands of not just the men of the community, but also at the hands of the state constantly. So even when young girls or young women say go outside of their basti to attend a Holi ka Mela fair, even then the police might round you up if to when they hear you talking in Kanjar or talking in Parthi. So what it means to be a young woman or a young girl in such a community where you're working from a very young age, where you do most of the work that leads to income generation within the house, yet don't have a say. So that theory of resources, who has control over the resources, doesn't fit into this framework, because you don't still have say over what happens with that money. And a lot of the lens of criminality is connected to the idea of women being sexual subjects within that community. So locating how gender plays out, I think, is not isolated um, in this context. Uh, what what it means for schools or what it means for learning spaces to be doing, I think, is uh, first to sort of understand gender as something that is beyond the binary. Uh, if we see within the Bastis, everyone's experience of gender is very fluid. You will have young boys who anatomically, biologically may be born boys, but whose desires, whose orientations, whose identities psychologically uh, might might not be the eh, stereotypical masculine that media portrays, or that is considered as the dominant masculine. And similarly, you will have women who will be transgressing from those roles. So if such a fluidity can exist inside the community, then can schools also create a safe space and an inclusive space for such a fluidity to be experienced within school spaces? And not and I don't mean only schools as a formal learning space, but even basti centers and even libraries that are running in the community, or even spaces of gossip and spaces of sharing that are created inside the community, any of these educational spaces. um, so I think one part of that would be to create gender fluid conversations, create space for gender fluid conversations where we go beyond biology and we talk about identity, orientation, uh, uh, expression, how we wear gender, how we perform gender, and uh, in my limited context of work with Muskan, I've noticed that publications writing stories which richly and diversely express such experiences of gender, and writing them from not from a position of from a position of an outsider, where as an adult, as a cis het Savarna adult, I am telling that this is how gender should be performed, but to take the stories of the people of that community, uh, sensitively written stories, and to bring them back to our learning material, to allow for such stories to be written, um, is perhaps one way. So Muskan does a lot of publications work in this regard, and those also become a learning material for using in the class. Um, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, your later part of your discussion reminded me of one book which I read a couple of years back. It's either Iktara publication or Iklavya. It's the one of the title I read is Pani. Right, there is a story called Pani, and it's a character. Pani is a character. Pani is not water actually in that story, and that character portrays very beautifully this gender fluidity, right? So maybe yeah, that's one concrete thing that helping everyone to express themselves through various medium and story writing and scaffolding them in telling stories in some ways as an educator could be one of the ways of making the space slightly inclusive. And you also mentioned that you work with Basti centers and other such spaces, which is outside the state purview, typical out, not completely outside the state purview, nothing is outside the state purview, but where you have much more space to kind of do things which you feel that that's the right thing to do. So probably in Basti centers and other such alternative spaces with this kind of alternative mode of education, where you help children to kind of express, is very important. The second point which you made is equally significant, that in many contexts, I think in all the contexts, the issue of gender cannot be segregated from other issues of marginality. And that point has been made by many theoreticians now. Only reason sometimes we start talking in isolation about, say, gender or displacement, caste processes or class processes, just for our own convenience, right? For sort of analytical convenience. But in actual experience, things are experienced together, right? So yeah, that's interesting. That yes, by helping them to express themselves, right, through various means, and story writing could be one such means, but there could be other forms also. Maybe in the next round we'll have opportunity to kind of understand some of the other means through which um, those exclusion, sort not exclusion, that those inclusion can happen, and an educator can be a little bit more aware of it. Would you like to add a bit about your work with any teacher? So you as an educator is trying all these things. So have you been able to kind of communicate these ideas to teachers working in say a government school and something they are trying uh, in a minute or two? Just
Yeah, so my work has largely been only in the context of spaces that are outside government schools. Although
right.
Muskan's work in the past has been to work with government schools. For a long time, in fact, uh, what I hear from my colleagues at Muskan is that they would try and get children to enroll within government schools because these are children who have had very difficult relationships with schools. And when schools become sites of exclusion, where what you're wearing, what you bring in your tiffin, what language you speak, what work do you do outside, which part of the town you come from, all of them become sites of exclusion. Then they realize that children don't want to go to such a space which is so unsafe, which is constantly telling you and reinforcing feelings of shame. And that's how this work started, that we will create alternative spaces while also not at all meaning to say that one doesn't need to work with systems of government schools or Kendriya Vidyalayas or
Yes.
Jawaharlal Navodaya Vidyalaya, because the scope of work is much larger there and that sensitivity needs to develop there. So Muskan's work has been on the periphery of these government spaces. But some of the things that teachers and all of us have tried to do is, for instance, analyze media, analyze advertisements, analyze popular films, especially in middle and secondary school. Try and see what is it that are the dominant narratives of masculinity and femininity that we are constantly exposed to, and and if we are able to identify them, then also reflect on is our life or is our performance of masculinity or femininity always like this? Or the story you mentioned, Pani, which is from a collection by Rinchin, published by Eklavya,
Yes,
called
yes,
Ajuba.
yes. Yeah, yeah,
Stories like Gutli Can Fly, which is about a child who's exploring what it means to be a boy or a girl.
yeah.
Stories
Right.
like Nawab Se Nandini by Nirantar, which is about an autobiographical story by a trans woman. And like such stories also create space for dialogue. You will
Right.
also have resistance within that, where children will
Right.
resist कि ऐसा नहीं होता है. But for even for one person to imagine a different experience of gender, it can work as a spark.
Yeah, so opening a space for dialogue, that itself
Yeah.
is a kind of, something sort of any educator can try to do, right? So Nupur, as a sort of researcher, you have been, communicating to all these community organizations as well as these girls, right? And they also have certain cultural resources, within their community itself. So there are different ways of expressing gender identity. There are different ways of different resources through which you just express your lived experiences. So if you have come across anything of that nature where they can have safe space, sort of caring a space where they can express themselves, or you know, certain occasion, certain sort of ritual which allows you to kind of, express yourself. So I'll just give you a quick example. So maybe even in a very traditional society, and that is also one of the questions which one of the participants have raised, that in a very conservative society, what can be done to kind of bring some of these conversations within the community, because bringing the conversation is something we can hope to do. So even in a conservative society, you have something, certain norms where you are allowed to say things which you are normally not allowed to say. In many parts in Holi, you say many things which is normally not allowed, right? There are certain kinds of occasion where you can joke, right? There is this norm that you should not, attack a joker, right? So you can pretend to be a joker and you can say things which is normally not allowed to say. So there are, even within the very so-called conservative society, there are many cultural spaces which allow certain kind of dissent and certain kinds of, opening up. So just in case you have come across any such experiences while you are documenting things, maybe that will be quite helpful for us. Nupur, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so for these communities, it came in the narratives that these being of which community you are part of, it determines what kind of agency you have. So, for example, uh, adolescents from Santhal community, especially girls, I'm saying, girls from Santhal community has much more agency and mobility in deciding what they want in life, what they want to say, how do they want to do things, where do they want to get married. In comparison to girls from OBC communities, which have who experience certain kind of restrictions. And this also depends on but when it comes to economic status, OBC girls from OBC communities are much more enrolled in schools and being part of spaces which Santhal girls are not part of. When we talk about having such spaces, I think this looks much more visible in the Santhal community, where you have space and where you're not exactly defined by the patriarchal notions of being, as women or as girl, or how you should be and what kind of things you do, which is comparatively different in OBC community. These communities also have village also gram sangathan जिसमें होता है, तो gram sangathan में you come and talk about things which you want to understand, which you don't like, or like about things or things you want to talk about. Um, so there are different spaces in the community, but then it also this this was much more visible in Santhal community rather than OBC community. I also understand that such kind of culture that is there, the patriarchal culture that is there, which is largely pushes one into marriage at an early age, and then child marriage, and then early pregnancy, and then domestic violence, and how does one respond to such kind of culture? Um, and um, and this is one Krishna Kumar's Growing Up Male, in which he writes that schools have to be a space where you create a counter culture to those patriarchal notions. So
Right.
usually when we talk about these communities, we talk about having contextual education and bringing things from community and putting in school, so that students are much more familiarized with what is happening in the school and can relate it to the community. But then there are many aspects which we do not have to romanticize. So, for example, the kind of patriarchal training that these adolescents undergo, and how schools have the role in creating those countercultures and can envision a community within a school, that there could be other ways of looking at oneself, of looking at one's gender, and how to talk about that, how gender as a social construct and not a natural one, and have more spaces to talk about it. Um, and I think this is maybe we can talk about more about their aspirations and how what create as barriers in their aspirations in the next conversation.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. And last in the last round also you made this point that it's not just economic factor which is determining what kind of agency they will have. There are other cultural factors. So maybe economically, in some cases, in some community, girls are much more independent, but they don't have say in their in their day-to-day life. And then there is this hope that a school will play a role where they will get other set of narratives and other set of experiences will give them opportunity to see the life from different perspective. Now we have some time, and in this round this is going to be slightly personal, in a sense that all of you have changed over the year, right? I had opportunity to teach two of you. So your work is very demanding as far as I can see. That requires certain kind of resilience, that requires to endure, a real sense of the word. So if you can talk about your personal experience when you started working, whether you have become much more caring person, much more patient. Now you have this uh, sort of capacity to listen or sort of endure in a situation which is really really demanding. uh, how these work have changed you over the years, right? Now it's been a while. You left the university and you worked in a field. What are the impacts on your personal life? Maybe this time I can start with Ragini, and then we'll come to Nupur and Aditya. Ragini, if you can start.
Um, I, I mean, there have been a lot of stumbling around and figuring things out. And now, when I think back to even something I've done last year or in the last year, I feel like, oh my God, what was I doing? I had no idea. I just went around uh, telling people this is right and this is wrong. So I think one part of what I'm beginning to grapple with, and I'm not fully understood this, but what I'm beginning to grapple with is that a lot of times there are some needs of the young people that I work with, and recognizing that I myself also know very little, that I assume on their behalf. And so, for instance, if somebody who I consider a close friend and a student is in a relationship that I think is detrimental or is not fair to her or is uh, misogynist or whatever. I used to earlier feel very upset. Uh, why does this person want to keep going back to their partner? When they live by feminist principles, why can't they see this? But understanding the messiness that real life exists within, and that a lot of times the needs I assume might not be the needs that are being expressed. And so, what kind of a comrade or what kind of an ally do I need to be in that space? Is something that I'm sort of trying to rework in my mind. Um, and and the other thing is the role of listening. As someone who has come from a lot of privilege and often is coming from oppressor communities, uh, saying that I want to understand what it means, like what it means to create critical and relevant educational experiences for young people from marginalized communities. I think just this idea that um, uh, does someone have much more to lose uh, in admitting to one's errors, for instance, or does someone have much more to lose in saying that you should be compassionate, you should be kind, you should be caring, you should be listening? My experiences and the people I work with, their experiences on an everyday basis are very different. So the need to listen, I think I'm feeling more and more, is something that I need to work on. Um, those are some things that I'm trying to understand for myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So, Nupur, if you can just share your experience of working now, leaving the university and working as a researcher. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think as part of the community, because now it's been more than a year, almost 2 years, and I feel like we are. So when I started, well, I started being there in and going to the community, there was a different kind of lens that I have to be, go inside and made want, but then I feel now more as part of the community, as community knows me, understand me, and I also understand them. So there's a good relationship there in that way. Apart from that, I think what really changed is my mindset. When we go to communities, the dominant ideology is that schooling is intrinsically beneficial, or schooling as a liberating force, or the whole discourse of education, opportunity, mobility, and then you go and teach, one should go to school. But then, like Ragini said, there are lot many things that are happening within that discourse of schooling and mobility and opportunity, and how how there so and the other discourse, the dominant narratives are how cultural practices, of puberty and then marriage and safety and domestic labor keeps adolescents at home, keeps especially girls at home, and not let them go to school. So I think this this dominant ideologies and this biases have been shed in my mind, and now I am more, I understand that what are the whole dynamics and processes go around. And so how the community wants that their education investment has to be translated into some economic return when they are investing. Education is a risk for them. It's not just any luxury or something that they should do, but it's a risk for them, and they take that risk, thinking that this would translate into an economic return, and it would create some successful stories, but then it does not happen, and this kind of creates some environment of resentment and loss of hope within communities, and which brings more question to kind of work that we do, and also the kind of work that university do in um, outreaching students who are from these communities for admissions. So these communities are looking, especially girls. When we talk about girls, they have aspiration for education, because this is their chance of social mobility, a chance of saving themselves from a lot of things that they think that they do not want to be a part of. But then, how do we do that? How do we create those successful stories? How do we create those reference stories that if one, in community, what happens if one Didi becomes nurse, all the girls in the community wants to become a nurse. If the one Didi do something as SHE member, all of them also wants to do something as SHE. So they believe in these reference stories. So can we have some reference stories where these adolescents have finished their education, and it translated into something beautiful, something that help community, that help family, and in this, the kind of work university do in the outreaching students can be outreach to those students, and also make sure that while they complete their education, um, they also have placements where they can have go and tell to the community, see, this is what has been done. So I think now I have understood all those dynamics that are playing around, and how it's not just cultural factors, or it's not just structural disadvantages, but how these both are supplementing each other, and pushing children out of the schools instead of using the word dropout. So I think this kind of awareness for me is most important, the change that has come in.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, this grand narrative of education and aspiration and mobility is not working. What we need basically is much more contextual narratives, sort of micro narrative, which actually they can see things happening, within their community, right? So this grand narrative of national development through education and all such things are sort of far-fetched. Aditya, if you can just quickly tell us the way you changed over the years, working in with this idea of social emotional learning, because one aspect of it is like self-awareness,
Okay.
right? Being aware of oneself. So, what is how you look at yourself and your work?
So,
Yeah.
if I have to just like say go through my journey of since I left, I have been passed out from college. So I would say the three core competencies I have developed. One is obviously the learning motivation, and emotional resilience is there, and then more responsible decision making. So so I had a privilege of both working deep, like on the grassroots, deep rooted with the issues were pertaining to different sections of the society. I won't say only the girls, but there were a number of communities I have worked with while I was working in Bihar. There was a community, Gulgulia community and Nut community. So it was not only the education issue or something, but yeah, working with the communities, then coming to the school, and then like the later part was basically working with the governments, state government. So I would say what I have learned is basically number one is obviously when I say about the emotional resilience, basically, so emotional resilience is something which has helped me up, like say whenever we visit communities or we go and like we work with the communities, there are n number of things, n number of issues. So I think I have developed a kind of resilience on prioritizing the issues which can be taken care of, and then that can be brought to the system. Changes in the system can, if needs to be done something, so that needs to be changed in the system, and then coming back again with the community. So what I have learned is like say uh, closely working with the system. Like so, I think when we are working, so it's nothing like government is doing something very wonders or something of that sort, but yeah, working with systems can change and the impact can be in millions. So that is what I have learned throughout my journey till date. And that is something, because when we try to change things at systemic level, or when we say systemic change, I think that is somewhere it makes changes in millions of lives. So that is what I have. Yeah. Much.
Yeah, so we got a sense. So you are one who is working actually with the government and with the system, as you put it, right? And with this idea that this can change things, and this helps us, doing things at certain scale, right? The challenges are huge. It's not that, but learning in a specific community also helps, right?
Okay.
Learning within a specific community, within a given work context, that helps. That's what Nupur and Ragini was trying to bring, right? Because sometimes these grand narratives are not helpful in kind of motivating all kinds of people, right? So we can just at this point we can take up certain questions if we have either the question which have been raised here, now or maybe earlier. So Neha, if you can bring certain questions for the speakers or even for me.
So, Manoj, there are no questions so far. We
Hmm.
can perhaps continue with our discussion and later see if there are questions.
Yes, so no, then I can just bring some of the questions which were raised earlier before
Yes, we could
this,
do that.
this webinar. So, no, one of the question, and that is that would be very interesting for me to understand that there is one question which says that it's easier to talk about gender at very theoretical and general level. It's very different for the practitioner. Actually, it looks like. That this discussion on gender is just for conversation. That is precisely the language which has been used, and then the other actual work is really different. So do you see this kind of dichotomy in your work? To my mind, there shouldn't be any dichotomy between what we learn at the theoretical level and what we actually do, at the practical level. Theory and practice should inform each other. So how do you see this particular situation? So whatever theory you learned of gender, of such things, or of marginality in university. Was that helpful in any sense? So maybe we can also respond to the question which have been raised.
I, uh, I think Manoj, uh, the theories which we learn in classrooms, I think that help us to that is somewhere it is helpful to us to get a larger perspective, and that is somewhere which has helped us to break the stereotypes of the gender which we generally carry in at the back of our mind. So I think that is how it goes. So inside in the classroom, the theories are there just to bring a kind of say perspective to us, and when we go and work in the communities, these theories build upon, and that is how we see at the problem, and accordingly we see the solutions as well. So
Yeah. So as I earlier said that there are certain processes, and sometimes these theory help us in understanding those processes of gendering. So whatever outcome we have, that can be captured through statistics, but the processes are something where actually many theories of gender and other theories of marginality help, right? But those are general explanations, right? Uh, when you start working, you need to kind of reopen and rework your theory, because general explanation may help up to the extent, but then, as Nupur said in the last conversation, that you feel that the grand narratives have certain clear limitation. So, with that in mind, can Ragini, you would like to reflect on this question of theory, general theory, grand theory of gender versus some of the theorization you do on day-to-day basis while you work, you do theorization. For example, I mean that's just to convey the intent of the question. So, for example, we may have various theories of pedagogy and how to do certain kind of pedagogy for gender sensitization. But one thing you figured out for your context is probably creating a space for storytelling, right? That is one of the ways which worked in your case. So, with that intent, if you can just sort of reflect on your work where this grand general theory versus the other side has intersected, right?
Yeah, actually, in my mind, this is not so much of a dichotomy. What I see uh, in my experience of being a teacher in this setting is that um, sometimes theory helps us, like the needle of a compass. It helps us give words to something
Or
that feels very personal. So, for instance, understanding that the patterns of housework and what is external work is sexual division of labor, is also what is commonly seen all around us, is also what the census data would be pointing towards. In different contexts, when women are asked how much income generation work are you doing, their answers would be very diffident. But in terms of the amount of work that women do on an everyday basis, the reality is very different. These kind of the theory helps in affirming that my experience is not that is not random or is not incidental and is not personal. And at the same time, only living within theories has its own limitations. In that,
right,
uh, praxis has to inform perhaps uh, our experience of theories of gender. So, for instance, queer theory needs to be a part of our uh, understanding of gender uh,
right.
uh, in the school as well, um, and so on. So there is not that much of a dichotomy in my mind. For me, part of being a teacher researcher is also that theory and praxis should feed into each other constantly, or reflection and action should feed into each other constantly, and theories also need to change with time. Then, um, so that's
I
my
really
take
like
on
the
it.
way you. Yeah, please complete.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, that's what
No,
I'm
I
saying.
really
That
like.
is how I'm processing it.
Yeah, I really like the way you use this, analogy of compass for theory, and you said that passingly. That's very important insight, and I keep saying this in different contexts that theories are much more like compass. It's not like a Google map, right? It gives you direction, and that's all. That's the role of theory, and general theory is, and that's an important role. Compass is I mean, is much be needed for navigating this space, which is so much, uncharted. So yes, there you start with this general ideas, but when you start working in a specific context, figure out your ways, right? So that's interesting. Probably if we can keep this analogy in mind for theory and practice, compass versus say Google Map, that will be really really helpful. I use this analogy in different contexts when I discuss about various things, foundational literacy to whatnot. Nupur, if you can just reflect on this question of learning theory in the university, in institutional space, practicing something on the ground, right? How do these two things interact in your work?
Yeah, yeah. So, so while I'm working with the Santhal community, I am very cautious of reading what the indigenous scholars, indigenous researchers has to say, because the positionality that I come from is from a dominant perspective. The kind of education I have received is from a dominant perspective. So I am continuously reading what indigenous scholars prefer, what they want. People researchers who are not indigenous, and when they come and work and research with communities like that. So one perspective I have taken is uh, always try to see those theories from the standpoint of the community. So these theories might help me, build a larger perspective of what has happened and how the processes work. But how they work in the context of the community has to come from the community and what is happening there. So a lot of times. Uh, there are theories that that might help me, that Bordeaux's cultural capital and all that would help me, that it does translate into economic capital when it's get accumulated, and then and one can get job, and one can see that happening in the community also, that whatever you learn as an education as a commodity, and then expect economic return. But then there are also theories which might not work from the perspective of community. Um, and one has to be so very clear. So I now work at two lenses. One, I see if this theory is working as a process in my understanding of, and bringing things together and tying them up, and also how community would see this process, and how it looks, how it comes out in their lived experiences. So this gives me some bandwidth, some close to what indigenous scholars prefer, and they recommend for researchers like me who come from non-indigenous background, and specifically from dominant communities.
Interesting the way you are, using this term indigenous scholars, right? We often identify university as a place of scholarship, and community as a place where actually you practice. So in these communities there can be scholars theorizing, and that's a different kind of theory, but they do it nonetheless. That also reminds me this idea of organic intellectual, right? That could be people engaged in certain kinds of community life, but still theorizing from, and that could be pretty empowering for the community as well as for the for the researcher and educator like you and me, right? Wonderful. So I think we have spent time today understanding this gender education and empowerment. Very interesting conversation as far as I can, if I may speak from myself. It was really really enriching, knowing your work in for some more detail, with some detail, right? And understanding how you have changed over the years. Uh, and whatever you are trying to do in a given circumstances, we are in a situation, right? Certain historical conditions are there, and we are working in that context. We're trying to bring some hope in that context, right? It's not that we can change the historical context, right? So, in whatever limited way we all are trying, that's really, really inspiring. Uh, thanks a lot for joining. I know it was challenging for three of you. You all are very busy working, and working in the ground is much more challenging. So, thanks a lot. Neha, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Manoj, for moderating the session. Thank you, Ragini, Aditya, Nupur. It was quite interesting the way the discussion went on. The fact the best part was sharing your personal things with us. That how did you what did you learn from the journey? Where are you at this point of time? So yes, thank you so much. It was amazing listening to all of you.
And thanks to all the audience, those of you who have joined, right? Yeah. So we can close now.